Hi, and welcome to our first Turing-Roche Partnership Versus video. I'm your host for today, Vicky Hellon, and I'm the community manager for the partnership. For those of you who haven't heard of us before, we're a 5-year strategic partnership between the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI, and Roche, the global healthcare company. Our aim is to collaborate through advanced analytics to develop new data science methods to investigate patient and treatment heterogeneity. So to understand how disease manifests in different ways in different people, why patients respond differently to treatment, and ultimately how personalized treatment can be improved. Okay, so today I want to introduce 2 members of our partnership team who will be answering quick-fire questions in the battle between academia and industry, and hopefully giving a bit more insight into the Turing Institute and Roche and how they work. So please welcome our fighters today, Sarah McGough and Ben MacArthur. So Sarah, could you please introduce yourself for us?
Absolutely. So my name is Sarah McGough. I am a senior data scientist at Roche, and in the partnership, I'm one of the data science leads on the Roche side. My background is in epidemiology, infectious disease epidemiology specifically, and I'm really interested in predictive modeling and leveraging our various massive volumes of digital health data to generate novel insights from them.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. And then Ben, to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Ben MacArthur. I'm the Deputy Programme Director for Health and Medical Sciences at the Alan Turing Institute, and I'm one of the leads from the Turing Institute side.
Thanks, Ben. And I think you're going to get us started with the questions today.
I am. Can you see that, my mug of questions?
Looking great.
The Turing brand. Okay, let me pull out the first question. Oh, this is a good question. So it says, we seem to be using the terms data science, AI, and machine learning synonymously. Are they the same or different? What's your opinion, Sarah?
Okay, this could be a hot take. I like to joke that these are all just clever names for statistics. I do think, technically speaking, there's a hierarchy of terms. I would say semantically, I think they're used interchangeably, and I think that's okay when you're just using them to describe generally the approach of using advanced analytics to get insights from data. But if I had to build out that hierarchy, I would say data science, AI, machine learning. And I think AI and machine learning, somewhat interchangeable. AI is a bit of a buzzword. It's very science fiction-y, but it's more like the process and intelligence system used to, make decisions, problem solve, mimic human intelligence. And I would say ML's like the tool that can enable that. But I'm comfortable with all 3 terms.
And which one is most used at Roche, Sarah? Is it the data science?
I would say data science, because we have a whole division in data science. But then I would say most people are going to refer to their work as using machine learning, not AI. I think AI, I personally rarely use that. I think it's overselling what you're doing a bit, and it sort of adds a godlike mentality to what is in the end really math and statistics and model building. So that's just my personal opinion.
Oh, wow, I have to give my opinion as well. Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because that's the idea. There's like academic.
I thought that I might avoid that hard question.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's this joke, isn't there, that machine learning is written in Python and R, and AI is written in PowerPoint. This idea that people say AI when they want to sound clever, basically. But I more or less agree with what Sarah was saying. In some ways, AI is a sort of overarching term that tries to capture something of the flexibility of human intelligence. So that was like the original definition, if you like, that AI is about making machines do things that would require intelligence if they were done by humans. So that means, transferring insight from one context to another, learning from your past, learning from your history and so forth, things like that. So if you like, it's a sort of bigger thing than machine learning. Machine learning is really more about designing algorithms to do specific tasks. So you might say, there's a job that I want to do. I want to say, I've got some data and I want to say, I want to predict, is a person likely to get a disease or not? So there's a specified task and you'll come up with an algorithm to help you answer that question, that task. Whereas AI is a bit more all-encompassing than that. But in some senses, Sarah's right. It all comes back to some kind of statistics in the end.
This is another good one. Will AI replace doctors and clinicians? How can AI be made more trustworthy and appealing for healthcare professionals to adopt them?
Oh, well, that's a super hard question. I mean, that's an absolutely enormous question. I don't think that that's the aim, to have AI replace the clinician. That's certainly not the aim. I mean, what we would like to have are tools and techniques drawn from the data sciences that can support clinical decision making, so aid the clinician in their decision making. So the intention is not that they should replace the clinician at all, because that personal contact, for a start, is very, very important. You wouldn't want to go to an algorithm for a consultation. You need to see a person that's going to listen to you as a person. And so the aim really is that these tools and techniques are enabling us to make the most of the data that we have to improve patient care. And that certainly doesn't mean eliminating the doctor, far from it. What was the second half of the question?
How can AI be made more trustworthy and appealing for healthcare professionals to adopt them?
Well, that again is a huge, huge question. I think that sometimes people think that particularly AI methods or machine learning methods are like black boxes, that you put some data in and something comes out of it, but you don't really know what happens inside that black box. And in critical areas like healthcare, it's really important to know what's happening. You don't want to have a diagnosis being made and the underlying principles being unclear. So for a clinician, for instance, they would want to know, what is that algorithm doing? How is it helping me? And so I think that having a way of deciphering what the algorithm is doing and a way of conveying that learning to the clinician in a language that they understand is really important, because of course the clinician also has to convey that to the patient, and it's really important that the patient trusts what's going on.
I think my view is that there are tasks that AI can replace or automate, but I do not think AI will replace people. I think the computer vision space is a really good area for this. Read it, you can read thousands of imaging scans within minutes. There's a lot of those like skin cancer or melanoma detection algorithms, like taking a picture of your mole. I think about these as AI/ML assisted decision-making tools, the way that Ben said, because at the end of the day, these are not comprehensive treatment plans. These are not replacing human judgment, but they are assisting in it. And as for the second part, I think models become more trustworthy and appealing when they're explainable and transparent, like what Ben said. I think let's not take for granted the intelligence of healthcare professionals. I think they're capable of understanding complex models if explained to them well. I think as equally from a simple regression and a neural net, you can still explain how the data are being used by the model, what the model's predicting, what are the most important factors that are playing into that prediction, and what does that mean for a decision that the clinician needs to make. And I think taking the time to make that process transparent will do a lot in increasing the widespread adoption of these types of models in practice.
What is your biggest hope and apprehension regarding data science? That's another huge question, isn't it?
Huge question. I guess when I look at data science as such a rapidly growing field, I think there's a lot of hope that I have for this really beautiful feedback loop that we're seeing with these cyclical improvements in data, technology, and infrastructure kind of marrying together as we invest more into data collection. We're seeing both the volume and the quality of data really grow immensely. And I think that's playing back into researchers who are developing better methods to deal with complex data. We're then getting better insights from data. So I think just even looking at the healthcare industry and looking at the ubiquity of like electronic health records, digital health apps, wearables, all of these ways that we are accessing these massive volumes of health data, we are doing so much to improve early detection and make advances in treatment plans and prognosis by just understanding even the heterogeneity of, for example, the cancer landscape in the US. There's so much data we can tap into. I think there's so much promise. And as a researcher, I'm personally just excited because as data science grows, as we actually see people, like I'm a data scientist, but I never strove to be one years ago. Now you really see people aiming to be a data scientist as a career. So there's so much investment in that education and the methodology development tools, open source packages, that I'm just excited to see it grow. I think that my biggest apprehension plays back into this in that data science might be seen as this magic bullet solution. And Ben alluded to this at one point, but having these sophisticated models be so accessible, you really want to be careful that this large quantities of data that we are now generating daily are not just sort of thrown into a black box solution without really understanding the consequences and the interpretation, and is this the right data for the right question and the right model. And so just in particular, not treating data science like it will solve all the problems in the world, and also not over-engineering solutions when sometimes a very simple solution is what's needed. Good one. What advice would you give to a new data science student and or to a new data science professional?
Oh, that's a good question again. I think so, from an academic perspective, academics often will focus on very, very, very specific topics. So you'll specialize in a certain area. And that's the way the academic career path generally works. So you'll become a real expert in a certain area, and you'll have deep, deep knowledge in that area. And that's a really, really good thing. I guess my encouragement would be to be curious outside of your area of expertise, other areas of science, other areas of data science, the ways in which what you're learning and specializing in could potentially be applied elsewhere. So to maintain that focus on your primary area of interest, but also to cultivate an interest in the world at large.
Just to follow up on that, Ben, I feel like Turing does that quite well, I would say. I don't know if there's anything you want to kind of mention around that.
Yeah, so I think the Turing does do that very well, actually. I mean, the Turing is, if you like, set up to be a multidisciplinary environment. So any one day at the Turing Institute, you'll bump into all kinds of people there. All kinds of data scientists, statisticians, machine learners, experts in modeling, all kinds of computer scientists, but equally domain specialists, experts in the environment, experts in the various different sciences, political scientists and so forth. So having that sort of multidisciplinary community and a space for everyone to mix and learn from each other is really, really important.
I would agree with exactly that. I'll add from an industry perspective. I think I ended up in the healthcare industry because health was my passion, and the application of quantitative methods that I found most fulfilling. But basically no sector in the 21st century exists without being data driven, without using data science. And so my advice would be to just explore what excites you, whether that is the environment or policy, finance, healthcare. All of these use data and use very similar methods. So if you can go deep on, your technical expertise, there's so many transferable skills then that you can transfer to other sectors, but really do some digging on what excites you, because you can really apply it however you like in a career.
Okay, so the next question is, how important is data quality for predictive models to succeed? Is performance mostly dependent on model design?
Good one. So important. Both are so important. I think my view will always be start with good data. I think, that the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Your model is really only as good as the data you use to train it. And, bad data into a great model can still give you bad results, whether you are dealing with biased data and you are propagating that bias unintentionally, or you have biased predictions that are wrong. So I think you have to start with good data, and you can't take for granted that sort of 80% of data science, which is cleaning your data, understanding how it was captured, any systematic biases or missing data that need to be addressed, again, before you actually put this into the model. I think the modeling part is temporally the shortest part of data science in terms of time spent doing anything. I think availability of data is also important. I think that was part of the question. So having not a lot of data is also challenging, because if you have a really weak signal, it's very hard to pick up on that in a small sample size. We are often very limited, for example, when we're studying rare diseases, or if you're building a model on very few patients or observations, you can definitely risk overfitting and seeing poor performance. So that is, I would say, quality and then availability, because there's ways you can kind of get around availability. Maybe you can sample or upsample, but I think starting with the quality is key.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm in danger of agreeing with you again, actually, but I'll say one comment, I guess, which is that I think that sometimes people think the more data, the better. I'll just get more and more data, and that will somehow help me in my learning. And I think that that's not really true, because more and more data doesn't necessarily mean better and better quality data, exactly as you were saying, Sarah. I mean, like in a clinical context, you can collect information that is likely to be predictive, blood pressure and medical history, genetic information, all that kind of thing. And that might all be relevant to the clinical question that you're trying to address. There's other information that's unlikely to be clinically predictive. You could, if you wanted to, collect like the color of the patient's socks. That would be more data, I guess, about the patient, or you could collect some other information about their lifestyle. But it's unlikely that the color of their socks is going to be predictive of any healthcare outcome. So you have to be really careful about, well, what data do I really need to produce a good model? Are these features, which features should I focus on? Which features should I ignore? And that's a really difficult job, because you often don't know that to start off with. So somehow you have to decipher which are the meaningful features as part of the modeling process itself. So there's a kind of intimate connection between the models that you might generate and the data that they're built upon. And it's, if you like, not just a one-way flow from the data to the model, but there's a more complicated relationship. And understanding that relationship is really difficult, because, like I said, you don't know in advance what is going to be predictive. So I think that I would agree with you that the data has to come first, and we need just better quality data, and also models that are able to make the most of the available data, because, like you said, often you don't have the data that you want, and it's often no good to say, well, I want more data, because it's just not available to you. So what do you do under those circumstances? So to have modeling methods that are able to make the most of the data that you have, to leverage any prior knowledge. So that could be mechanistic biological knowledge about the underpinning mechanisms of the disease. It could be knowledge about related diseases, for instance. So really combining prior knowledge with tools and methods that are able to make the most of the data that you do have available. That's the real challenge.
Yeah, I would say at Roche, we have access to so many massive digital health data vendors, from insurance claims to electronic health records. And I think one of the things you can do is go on a massive fishing expedition, which is what is important. Like if I dump all of this into a model and you have all this sort of nonsense information in addition to things that may actually be real signal, like we find those models are of course much weaker than if you had, used clinical knowledge to actually curate the appropriate set of variables to actually do what you're trying to do. Maybe you're trying to predict survival, choosing those variables. We go on a lot of these sorts of modeling expeditions where we try to understand what's the most prognostic variables in these data sets. And it's very hard to do when you are introducing so many noise variables. So doing something that's like automated feature selection, for example, tends not to work as well as sometimes just getting together in a room with clinicians who will tell you what they think is most important for XYZ cancer types. So it's definitely a balance because there's so much you want to automate with these massive data sources that you can access, but then you may not actually be getting the most out of your data.
Yeah, that intersection or that interaction with the clinicians, I think, or the domain experts is really vital, rather than that kind of fishing expedition that you described. To bring in that expertise right at the start, I agree with you, that can be really fruitful. What technical and policy measures should be considered regarding ethics and safety of data science models, particularly when used in healthcare and biomedicine?
So I think what we can say about this is there really are not a lot of policy measures in this space. And I actually think this space is one to watch in the next couple of years. I think that's going to be hugely developed when data science models become increasingly used in healthcare and biomedicine. Like in the US, FDA has not really released much around guidance for sponsors that submit, say, a medical device that uses AI or ML underlying it. I think only this year they just published their first industry guidance specifically around this. And it was like for a very specific application like radiology. And so I think this is a space that like Turing as a policy influencer, like Roche as an industry partner, that's a space we can definitely shape in the coming years. But I think it's I think there's so many things you can embed in that. And I'm curious to see where regulators take it, for example, in like transparency, explainability. How much is validation going to be, required or kind of monitored when you submit like a product that uses an algorithm? What internal capabilities is FDA going to use to say, yes, that meets the criteria for your target population? Or did you validate it on these other populations? I think questions like that will come out, and I'm curious to see to what extent that will be mandated. Like, when we submit drug applications, FDA often comes back and says, demonstrate the representation of your trial to the general US population. So I think those types of questions might feed into like the algorithm side too, like demonstrate that this is generalizable, or that this at least generalizes to other data containing your target population. I think that'll be really interesting, personally, from an industry perspective, as we're developing products like this or decision support tools. I think that's an exciting space, but I think we have no idea what's going to come in the coming years. When you're using ML or algorithms in any kind of sector, there's some risk, but I think healthcare maybe carries the greatest risk when you're dealing with patients. So we're going to see stricter regulations on that. How to regulate that is my biggest outstanding question around proving the representation, doing risk assessment, bias and fairness assessment. I don't know hard lines will be drawn in the sand to enforce these types of principles around fairness, safety, transparency, risk. But yeah, so I think it's a really good point.
This is a good question. So this is for you specifically. What is the biggest misconception about working in industry? All
right. I look forward to hearing your answer for the academia part of this. I think there's a misconception that when you work in industry, that you suddenly stop doing research or anything that resembles academic work. And I would say, in fact, my job is very much the opposite, because publishing, attending conferences, bringing my work generally to the outside scientific community, open sourcing even, those are all key tenets of my job. And so I think, yes, there are some key differences in that we're working maybe more with products and drug development, but still there's a huge emphasis on robust scientific research and rigor. And in that sense, coming from academia, it very much has that flavor.
Can I ask a follow-on question? How much intellectual freedom do you have in an industry role in your experience?
I think all of our research inquiries tend to be incepted from some industry need. So from some maybe gap in knowledge or some unmet need that we're trying to understand in patient populations, or it's rooted in our drug development. But then what we can do with that, there's a great amount of intellectual freedom. I think there's a huge emphasis on us bringing in our research and skill sets and expertise and backgrounds to solve these types of problems, to recommend and investigate novel data sources to bring in to answer these questions, novel methodologies. And when they don't exist, we develop them and we publish on that for the broader scientific community. And so I would say there is a good amount of intellectual freedom, but oftentimes the problem statement will come from clinical development teams, drug development teams, and we are sort of stakeholders in that process where we then, as data scientists, help recommend solutions.
That's interesting. I mean, I can say the sort of flip side to that, actually, from the academic point of view. I think that people sometimes think that in an academic career, you sort of retreat from the world and you go to an ivory tower for 50 years and no one will ever see you again. Like, you're just doing your, whatever it is, your theory, working out your theories. You're not really doing anything that has any relevance to the real world. So that's the primary misconception, I would say. You know, the research that we do in the academic world is very much connected to the real world. And often we work with partners like with yourselves at Roche to advance our research. So in actual fact, I think that those are, if you like, the most exciting research projects where there is something to be done that hasn't been done before, you know, some new theory to be developed, some new methods to be developed. And there's a need for those methods. And so there's a very well-defined academic problem, if you like, but it has consequences in the real world, and it can be used in the real world. So that's why I'm so keen on this Turing-Roche partnership, because if you like, it's bringing the best of the academic world and the best of the industrial world, and we're really trying to bring those two together to solve some really hard problems. And so that's what makes it so exciting. That's what makes it so challenging. That's what makes it so fun.
Agreed.
That's great.
Nothing to add to that. That's a great closer. How to make sure that decisions taken by machine learning algorithms are fair and unbiased. Does bias arise from data or design?
I mean, in a healthcare context, that is absolutely vital. Like, it's absolutely critical that any decisions that are made are unbiased and fair, they take into account all of the relevant information and no information that is not relevant. And that's a super hard thing to do, of course, because like we said earlier, things like ethnicity, for instance, might actually have a bearing on a clinical outcome. So it wouldn't be unfair to include that information because it would be done to improve patient care. But there'll be other circumstances where it's not relevant, and so it shouldn't be included. And then, of course, there are difficult questions about when should you include it, when shouldn't you include it, which combinations of features should you be including? Do you have all the data that you need from all of from a representative population and so forth? And so those things are super, super difficult because they relate to the individual as a sort of integrated whole.
I think in healthcare in particular, there are so many examples of, underrepresentation in healthcare research and the ways that can exacerbate existing inequalities. And so, of course, as we say, garbage in, garbage out, if you are dealing with a biased or non-representative sample of data, you can certainly propagate that bias and amplify decision-making that's potentially discriminatory. And in industry, like when we deal with FDA, a huge component of FDA's agenda includes advancing inclusive research. And when we have clinical trials that enroll one Black patient, that is not going to be acceptable. And so, if you don't have an inclusive trial, you end up needing to do post-market research and post-market studies that include more like representative groups that really represent the target population, in that case being the US. And I think, it's just really important to have that representation because, okay, bringing it back to machine learning and algorithms and training models, there's so many examples where we, for example, the Human Genome Project, I think it's like less than 1% of the samples that originally went into that were from people of African descent. Image classification training models. I think I saw a really great Turing talk actually about a group that was trying to build a more diverse library of human images to just represent many different skin tones. And I think in healthcare research, at Roche, we're doing a lot with that so that, diagnostics looks differently if you're taking a picture of a mole or melanoma manifesting on white skin versus darker skin. And so you end up with a model, if you've trained only on white patients, it's not going to perform as well on Black patients. And then you have this trail of misdiagnosis, differential access to treatment, and suddenly you end up with a worse situation where you've exacerbating these key health inequalities. And so I think across the board, striving to generate additional representative data and not just being comfortable with the data that's already been historically collected, I think is going to really change the game for bias and fairness in the future. And so Roche is sponsoring the African Genome Project, for example, to actually collect specific genome repository specifically from patients of African descent so that we can understand the diversity and heterogeneity of the human genome better. So I forget what the original question was, but I think it was something around
whatever it was, that was a good answer.
Yeah, data or design. I think it comes down to the data first and foremost.
There is, just following on from what you were saying, there is, whenever we collect data, or often, there is a technology behind that. So say it's genomic data. There is experimental technologies behind that data capture process. So as data scientists, we would see the data, but even before we get the data, there are potential sources of bias and unfairness. So a good example of that is the pulse oximeters measuring blood oxygen level, and the fact that they were not so effective at measuring blood oxygen level from darker skinned subjects. So that's an issue to do with the underlying technology that is capturing the data for us as data scientists to use. And so we also have to be aware of that side of things as well, and to realize that there might not be, or there might be bias, issues of bias or lack of representation or quality from the technologies themselves.
That's kind of one thing I just wanted to add, or maybe ask out loud, which is how to detect that. And in my opinion, in that case, for example, it would come down to validating the pulse oximeter in multiple groups of people, and to see that the performance was really bad in patients with darker skin because of the way the light is detecting the hemoglobin, something like that. So in addition to collecting a lot of representative data, like, it's up to the data scientist also to think about, okay, how is this model being developed? If it's not being developed in a representative group, can you make efforts to do that? And then that's where you would flag, oh, this might be performing differently on different subgroups. This might be a problem. Through that kind of, I don't know, is validation
but there's a nice connection there. It's not just that we receive the data. As data scientists, we receive the data unquestioningly. We receive that data, but it's up to us to explore it and to really question it, and to say, you know, is this really right? Are there issues that we could correct? And then, of course, to feed that information back to the experimentalists. So there's a virtuous loop there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we're concluding is that human judgment really plays a strong role, and you really can't just blindly automate so much just by having data and models. The role of a data scientist is much more sophisticated than that.
That's a great take-home
message. I was about to say, like, what an ending.
We solved data science.
I loved it. Thank you so much, Ben and Sarah, for that fascinating conversation. And thank you so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed the video, and we hope to repeat these in the future with colleagues from Turing and Roche. If you'd like to find out more about the partnership, please visit our website, which has more information and ways to get involved, such as signing up to our newsletter, joining our Slack workspace, and registering for our monthly Knowledge Share series events.